Minister and Minister for Flood Recovery, Steph Cook, Jane Golding from the Bureau of Meteorology, and Dan Austin, who's the acting SES Commissioner. What we've seen overnight and will continue to see over the course of the next few days and coming weeks, sustained and heavy rainfall, and there are a number of evacuation orders and evacuation warnings in place across our state. Particularly, we see in the northwest of Sydney, in the Hawkesbury Nepean area, and in the southwest of Sydney, in the Camden area as well. There is significant risk continuing, as we've seen in place today, of flash flooding. And can I continue to ask people across our state to follow the instructions of the SES. We currently have 23 evacuation orders in place across the state. That is affecting 2,388 people. We currently have 16 evacuation warnings in place, which is affecting 1,742 people. In the last 24 hours, we've had 38 flood rescues across our state. So clear message today is that where those evacuation orders are in place, please evacuate. If those evacuation warnings have been issued in an area where you live, please get ready to evacuate. I think it is. I think one of the pleasing aspects for me as Premier, over the course of the past, 6 weeks and beyond, and as we go forward, despite the heavy rainfall, despite the substantial flooding that we've seen across our state, what is incredibly pleasing has been that we've only lost a very few amount of lives. And that has occurred because of the efforts that everyone has made across our state in following the instructions of the SES. So I can continue to ask, please don't drive through floodwaters. Please be aware of the surrounds and what is going on around you. Flash flooding can occur very, very quickly. And we've seen with this heavy rainfall, which is expected to continue over the next days and weeks. I want to thank everybody for their patience. I want to thank our SES, our RFS volunteers who are out there day in, day out, overnight, conducting rescues, and most importantly, putting their lives at risk to protect ours. So those instructions aren't there for the sake of it. Those instructions are there to keep you and your family safe, and importantly, to keep our great volunteers safe as well. So can I thank everybody across our state for their patience, their ongoing patience during this difficult time, and also say that if we can continue to follow the instructions of the SES, we'll get through these issues, this flooding, as we have in the past, and we will rebuild strongly right across our state. But please be alert of the conditions around you, and I want to thank you once again for the efforts that you're making. Now going to pass to Minister Cook, then we'll hear from the Bureau, and then we'll hear from the SES, and then we'll take your questions. Steph, sorry.
Thank you, Premier. I know that our communities are flood fatigued. We have had months now of one rain event after another, constant rain, flooding, of course, over that time. We've had people having to prepare their homes over and over again, and people right across Sydney and indeed right across the east coast of New South Wales, the subject of evacuation warnings and orders at various stages. So I really want to thank our communities for working so closely with the emergency services organisations over this time. It will stop raining. It will get better. We just need to keep grafting through this one day at a time. And over the period ahead, please continue to listen to the warnings and the advice of our emergency services organisations, particularly the SES, as the combat agency for storm, flood and tsunamis, who are doing a magnificent job of keeping our communities safe and indeed of saving lives. So whilst the rain today may be easing, the risks are not. I just caution people, if you are driving on our roads today, particularly across the metropolitan areas and down through the Illawarra, to please take care when you're on our roads. There is all manner of risks in being out and about at the moment, whether it is that risk of flash flooding or whether it's the risk of debris being left behind by some of the flash flooding that we've seen over the past 24 hours. I really just need to caution motorists and ask them to be safe on our roads at this time. I would finally like to say today a message to our emergency services volunteers, particularly the SES. We've had almost 1,200 SES volunteers out and about over the last 24 hours. They've undertaken more than 1,400 requests for assistance, including many flood rescues. I just couldn't be more proud of you as the Minister for Emergency Services. I just really want to thank you. Also to thank the families of our SES volunteers. Every time a volunteer puts on the orange or the blue wetsuits that we've seen out and about in our communities in recent days, they're leaving a family and they're putting their lives on the line to save members of the broader community. So I want to thank our families for doing that. And finally, to the workplaces right across New South Wales. We have got so many employers who are so generous and so committed to community service that they allow their employees to be away from the workplace at a time when we've got unprecedented labour shortages in a number of industries, and yet our employers are supporting our SES organisation and our SES volunteers in allowing them to leave their homes, leave their workplaces and be part of the efforts that are occurring at the moment. So thank you very much to all of our emergency services organisations. And of course, we can't leave out the other emergency services organisations such as the RFS, Fire and Rescue, Surf Life Saving, Marine Rescue and the Volunteer Rescue Association, who are really getting in behind the SES and making sure that at the end of the day, lives are saved, that properties are minimally impacted, and at the end of the day, that our communities get through this in one piece. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So that widespread rainfall that's been affecting the central and southern New South Wales coasts over the last 24 to 36 hours, that's now eased and we're left with some shower activity over the east. So we saw broadly, close to 200 millimetres over that period, some places a bit more, over Wednesday and Thursday into last night. And what we can expect over the coming days is showers to continue today, but really starting to see some pockets of clear sky this afternoon, and those pockets of clear sky increasing over the next couple of days. And Sunday in particular, for the Sydney and the Illawarra and the South Coast, is looking like a pretty nice day. We do have flood warnings current though, so although the rain is easing, we're not expecting hundreds of millimetres anymore. For Sydney's Central Coast, South Coast, the river heights, they're still up there, and we do have major flood warnings out for some sites along the Hawkesbury and Nepean River. So the Menangle, so that river has peaked at major last night, but it's still above major flood warning levels, and the levels reached there were close to what they saw in 1988, so unusually high. Other sites along the Hawkesbury and Nepean, Camden, Wallachia, North Richmond, are looking similar to what we saw last March, so March 2022. And some of those sites haven't peaked yet. So North Richmond and Wallachia in particular, those rivers are still rising, expecting them to peak sometime later this afternoon or evening, and then start dropping below major either tonight or tomorrow. So the rivers will be moving quickly. There's a lot of debris flowing around, and we're urging residents in particular around the Hawkesbury and Nepean to just keep an eye on the warnings as they get updated. They'll be updated regularly during today, and obviously pay attention to what emergency services are advising. And I'll leave it at that point and hand over to Daniel.
Thanks, Jane. Good morning, everybody. In the last 24 hours, the New South Wales State Emergency Service has continued to lead a multi-agency response across the broad areas that are the Central Coast, the Hunter, the metropolitan area, the Illawarra, and down into the South Coast as well. In that time, New South Wales SES, with its partner agencies, has responded to in excess of 1,200 requests of assistance and over 35 flood rescues across that period of time as well. In excess of 1,200 SES volunteers, as I say, supported by other emergency services, have been on the ground across this time, and we've seen some graphic images of flood rescues needing to occur, and the exceptionally fast reaction of a number of catchments where flash flooding occurred, moving significant debris with it. This comes as a really timely reminder about not driving, walking or riding through floodwaters. For those that drive around particularly parts of the Sydney metropolitan area today, but also the surrounding areas, you'll see significant debris left on the road where those flash flood events have occurred. That's the sort of stuff that we are trying to warn you about when we ask you not to drive through, not to walk through and not to play in floodwaters. There is a lot of material that has come down those waterways. As it stands at the moment, there are 23 evacuation orders and 16 evacuation warnings covering various parts of particularly the Hawkesbury Nepean catchment. As you've heard the Bureau say, whilst the rainfall has started to ease in most places, we do expect to see those river levels continue to rise for some time before they start to ease back over the next 12 to 24 hours. So what that really means for us is that we will continue to have flooded waterways and flooded river systems for a number of days yet to come. So we ask people once again to be really mindful of their situation, their scenario, what is going on around them, and to be across the warnings and the reports from the Bureau as to what is actually happening. You need to maintain your level of vigilance. We also know that school holidays are coming up. Many schools are closed today as a result of yesterday's weather, and people have already started to hit the road and have some kind of break over the school holidays. Our message is, sure, have a great school holidays, but please be mindful, once again, of the conditions that you're around. For many people, we go to places that we're not necessarily au fait with. So we ask you to be across the warnings, to be across your local scenario, your local conditions, to make sure that you can keep yourselves and your families and loved ones safe as well. I'd like to finish by saying and reiterate some comments that the Minister made before, that this is a significant team effort, and every time I stand at a lectern I talk about this being a significant team effort. It is the emergency services across all of New South Wales. But I'd like to say thank you to the community for the fact that they clearly have listened. Whilst we have done 35 flood rescues over the last 24 hours, the reality is, across a population base the size that we had under warning areas, 35 is actually quite a low number. And we are really grateful for the community for listening and reacting and acting on those warnings and not putting your rescuers or yourselves at risk. I'd also like to thank the families and the employers of the wonderful volunteers across both the New South Wales SES and our partner agencies. Again, without you, we can't do this. This is a team effort, and we rely on each other to keep each other safe and protect the community of New South Wales. So from us, thank you very much. And with that, I'll take some questions.
We know that La Nina conditions are set to continue, at least through the month of April. Should people expect that this is what April's going to look like, and indeed school holiday period? Are we going to be back here again and again, just in this moment, sort of rolling extreme events? Yeah,
so I think we mentioned the term flood fatigue earlier, and in some regard, if you think all the way back to the end of the 1920 bushfire season, we've really gone through flood event, severe weather event, flood event, severe weather event ever since. The community of New South Wales has certainly been through a lot. But looking forward, the forecast certainly for the rest of April is very much to see an above average rainfall. So yes, again, it goes to our message of being aware of your surroundings, being across what happens. We saw how quickly, within the widespread rainfall yesterday, we saw some exceptionally heavy downpours, and how quickly some of that flash flooding came up and impacted people on the road or in their properties. So again, yes, we're expecting to see continued weather conditions, continued rainfall, but people need to be mindful of their surroundings.
Just in terms of your people on the ground, has this shown you that you do need more resources? You have the Premier standing here, he's probably willing to help you out.
Look, I've said before, no organisation will say no to getting more. You know, we need to remember the fantastic volunteers of the emergency services, and you know, across New South Wales, a significant portion of the emergency services is made up of volunteers who give up their time freely, regularly, for very little thanks. So we need to make sure that they get every ounce of support that they can get. But as I said before, it's also about the families and the employers that make this possible to happen.
I think you might have mentioned the estimates hearing this week that you're hoping there might be a spike in interest from volunteers.
Yeah, so we already have seen across a number of locations an increase in, or a bit of a spike in the number of people expressing interest to join. And that's fantastic, and we'll work through those as quickly as we can to get people on board and get their training and get them into the environment. And look, you know, we really welcome that interest because our volunteers are a part of their communities. And, you know, this is not about someone from the outside doing something to that community. This is actually about the community working with the community. It just so happens that in this case, they happen to wear a particular type of uniform. But they are members, they are your next door neighbours, friends, all those kind of things. And without them, none of this happens.
Premier, I think it was Mr. Austin actually at Budget Estimates this week that was talking about the need to invest in better weather modelling technology, and obviously there have been some issues throughout these whole rain events with predicting what was to come. Are you hearing that? What are you willing to do? How quickly are you going to start looking at reinvesting and getting better weather modelling equipment in place for the SES and the BOM?
Well, we are looking at that now, and I was over the last few days up with Professor Mary O'Kane and former Police Commissioner Mick Fuller, who are conducting an inquiry in relation to not just response and recovery, but steps going forward, lessons that can be learned. And my expectation is that as part of that review, they will advise in relation to future investments and where we can do better. And from my perspective, as we move through a time, I think certainly where the future holds, where it wasn't that long ago that these events you would expect to occur every 100 or so years. We're now seeing them happen more often, and it would be remiss of any government to not be making greater investments. See, the budget's coming up. I know the SES, as they always do, put in a submission in relation to further funding. We will obviously look at that, and where those investments should be made, we will make those. And in addition to that, my expectation is that through the consultation that both Mary and Mick are carrying out, that there will be some key things there for the government to drive investments in, and if it's in those areas that have been raised at budget estimates or that you've raised there, Lucy, then we'd certainly look at it and do whatever we can. I mean, ultimately, we want to do whatever we can to resource our emergency services to the best level possible to keep people safe. And as I said, Stan's pointed out, I think it is, despite we're seeing all these evacuation orders, we're seeing a significant amount of evacuation warnings, but we've still had so very few rescues and lives lost. And that is because our communities across the board are following those instructions. That's incredibly positive, but obviously from our end, we need to make sure that we've got the best investment and equipment in place as possible.
Premier, we were hoping that Shane Fitzsimmons might be here to answer some questions. Seeing as he's not, I'll ask them to you if that's okay. Sky News has spoken to flood victims and social workers who say that Resilience New South Wales has had nobody on the ground to deal with the emerging mental health crisis in Lismore.
All right.
Why is that?
Well, firstly, I would say that when it comes to the recovery in the Northern Rivers, it is a multifaceted approach with a range of government agencies that are involved. And I've had the opportunity to visit resilience centres up there, whether it's Department of Community and Justice, our mental health support that's part of that, our housing teams that are engaged, Service New South Wales, and getting money out the door to support those people who need it. I would say, from the feedback on the ground and my own personal experience, that resilience in terms of the operation of those centres, bringing those government agencies together, is doing a very good job. And that's certainly the feedback on the ground. There is no doubt that the challenge up there is substantial, and it's not just in the short term in terms of housing. We've got currently around 1,400 people in emergency accommodation. That doesn't do justice to the fact that there are many, many more in garages, staying with mates and friends who we need to get into housing, mental health support off the back of it. It's been devastating. We've had, you visit communities there who have had one flood and within a couple of weeks later have had another one just as they were getting back on their feet. So it's a long journey, more investment needs to be made. But I believe, from what I have seen and the feedback on the ground, is that coordination from Resilience New South Wales is going well. I'll make the point, as I've said from the start, and I've tasked both Professor O'Kane and Mick Fuller, that I want a no-holds-barred report back to me. I don't want a political report. I want a frank and fearless report in relation to what could have been done better, where greater investment could be made, not just in immediate response, but in recovery. And I don't want there to be any political considerations in that. And if that's with the SES, if that's with the RFS, if that's with Resilience New South Wales, whatever the views are in terms of change, well, we should embrace that.
There was very much a theme during the estimates hearing, which I'm sure you watched, about the opposition alleging the government, the SES, Emergency Services, has dropped the ball. How do you respond to that from the opposition? The response in total. They're accusing the government of dropping.
I think that's that's politicizing. That's politicizing a natural disaster, and I think that's incredibly unfair and not right. And I know that the SES on the ground did an amazing job, but I would completely reject that framing. Having said that, clearly we need to prepare better. Clearly we need to respond better and recover and ensure the recovery goes well. And there are lessons that need to come out of it. That would occur after every single natural disaster. So it shouldn't be politicised. That's pretty poor form of the Labor Party to do that. I'm not interested in politics here. I'm interested in getting the key learnings where things could be improved, lessons going forward, and we will adopt them.
Did the PM politicise the natural disaster when he only offered, support in the early stages to particular electorates that were coalition seats?
Well, I've said I don't think so. I just think he's getting bad advice. I mean, the reality is it doesn't matter where you live in the Northern Rivers area. If you've lost your home because of the flood, you should get financial support. You can't discriminate based on LGA. You should be looking at what event occurred, what are the circumstances facing people, and provide the financial support that is necessary to get people back on their feet, back into their homes, and get towns operating again. And I can't see a reason as to why someone in Mullumbimby should be treated any different to somebody in Lismore. It's been a devastating time right across the Northern Rivers. But I'll make the point, Lucy, I had a discussion with the Prime Minister last night, very constructive, and that's why I don't believe there's politics at play, but I think there's certainly strong engagement, and I can say the people in the Northern Rivers don't care about where the money comes from, they just want that support and they're going to get it.
Lismore's the most flooded postcode in Australia. Wouldn't it make sense for the state's Flood Disaster Management Centre to be based in the nation's most flood-prone town?
Well, look, I'm not in charge. I don't have the experience in operational management of the SES. What I would say is that we're conducting a review, and let's work through that. It's not for a Premier to be making decisions in relation to the locations of where is best place to locate an emergency response to.
Premier, almost a third of trains were late last month.
Yeah. How
do you plan to fix that, given that severe weather is going to continue and COVID is still circling around?
Well, I know the Transport Minister's on that. It's been, we've had less services operating in circumstances where we've just come out of well, still in the pandemic, but we're having people now return to work. We've had some severe weather events that have slowed down the operation of the network. Now, I certainly want to make sure that people are able to get to work as quickly as possible and to get us home, and to get home as quickly as possible as well. My expectation as Premier is that the trains are running on time. Obviously we've had some concerns in the past. I would expect, speaking to Jane here, that we would expect as we move forward that these rain events will continue. That naturally puts pressure not just on the public transport network, it puts pressure on our roads. We'll have more traffic on our roads, and we will have some difficulties with the public transport. My expectation is our train should be running on time. My expectation of the Minister is that he will achieve that.
On the COVID situation,
yep.
Premier, what's your view about the future of the 7-day isolation rule for household contacts? Because during the week, the Health Minister pretty much dismissed the chance of that being eased or lifted.
Well, I think we should work. My view is we need to get to a point where you are sick, you stay at home. If you're not sick, you go to work and you go to school. That's living with COVID, and that's where we need to get to. We at the last National Cabinet, we had the AHPPC say that they would come back in relation to a proposal in respect of the relaxing of the close contact rules. And I think that's appropriate. I'll continue to work with premiers. I've been in contact with the Victorian Premier in relation to this, and that certainly makes sense.
So what would a time frame be, though? Because Mr Hazzard seemed to...
Well, I'll work, obviously they're competing interests, and what we've done in our state throughout the course of the pandemic is hear from our health teams, hear from our economic teams, and balance both views and make a decision. So I'll continue to work. Minister Hazzard will obviously have an opinion, and it's, knowing Brad, probably a very strong one. But ultimately, we will make a decision that we think is in the best interest of our state. But let's not forget, we have 20,000 cases still each and every day. We have many people in hospital and in ICU. We need to keep people safe, but balance that up with moving on and opening up. We talked about schools. We're getting a lot of school kids who are absent from school. I don't want kids to be absent from school. We said from the outset that we weren't going to close schools. We wanted kids back day one, term one. There was going to be an adjustment there. There was going to be inconvenience. I want to thank parents for the efforts and sacrifices they've made, because if the kids have had COVID and brought it home, then they've probably ended up having to spend some time at home as well. But we're going to push through, and the faster we can get to a point where the close contact rule is relaxed, the better.
And
Just a final
the
question on
federal
couple.
intervention, the federal intervention, your intervention in the New South Wales pre-selection is headed for the High Court today. Do you think that should delay the PM calling the election, or should he do it today?
Should the PM call the election? Well, that's really a matter for the PM in relation to when he
When would you like to see him call the election?
It's really not a matter of concern for me.
You were selecting the
I
candidates.
played a role that I was asked, and I'm happy to assist after the debacle of the New South Wales division in not selecting candidates. And it's great to see now that we have candidates in seats, because if you want to vote Liberal at the next election, you actually need someone to vote for. So that was a good start from the division to actually now get candidates in those seats. Look, obviously, we'll see what happens in the High Court, but ultimately, the election's on the election is happening imminently, will be called imminently, and the Prime Minister needs candidates in the field, and I wish them all the very best.
Just final question on Lismore, thank you, sorry. You said during the week that people need to be on the ground to see where assistance is needed to best direct relief. Has Shane Fitzsimmons been to Lismore?
I was in Lismore with Shane Fitzsimmons a number of weeks ago. All public servants in every area are working hard to ensure we get every person through this, and I certainly saw that on the ground. Let's wait. I know that the inquiry, the review that is underway, and we've opened to submissions, and we'll receive a lot of submissions. And where changes can be made, they'll be made. Where we can learn from those areas as a result of this flood, we will. And I think that's probably the more appropriate time to be asking these questions. But ultimately, as Premier, my job is to make sure when these events occur, our response is as best as it can be, and that we get people back on their feet as quickly as possible. And that's what we'll do.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, Hazard was pretty prominent during the week.
Forget about the old
Yeah, mine was also a bit odd. And maybe because I'm done with it.
Are you in a hurry? You need to go. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.